Behind the curtains of the Addington estate, shadows moved long after the family was gone. This isn't just rumor. Records exist. Witnesses swore what they saw, and the town still refuses to speak of it aloud. Because what hid behind those velvet drapes was not meant to be seen. And those who did were never the same. September 2nd, 1951. The Addington estate sat on the edge of a quiet suburban town, a looming Victorian house of gray stone and fading red brick. To outsiders, it was just another relic of the late 1800s, with its arched windows, steep gables, and those heavy crimson curtains that never seemed to move. But to the people of that town, the curtains weren't just fabric. They were barriers. They concealed a family whose name carried both wealth and unease. People whispered about the Addingtons in diners, at grocery stores, and in hushed tones at the post office. Everyone knew the stories, though no one admitted to believing them outright. By 1951, the Addington family was smaller than it had once been. Jonathan Addington, a stern man in his late 50s, ran the household with rigid rules and secrecy. His wife Margaret rarely appeared in public. Their two children, Emily, age 21, and Clara, age 18, were rarely seen without each other. Pale girls with dark hair who wore long dresses that seemed a century out of place. The Addingtons owned several businesses in town, a textile mill, a small hotel near the railway, and most notably, the estate itself, which doubled as a boarding house for wealthy travelers. But travelers rarely stayed long, and when they left, many didn't speak of their nights inside the house. One guest, a traveling salesman named Robert Thorne, told a colleague at the Greyhound bus station, "Those curtains upstairs? They move. I swear I saw a hand pull one back, but no one was there. And the whispering, Christ, the whispering kept me up all night." Never again. "I'd rather sleep in my car." That was in June 1951. He didn't return. Neighbors began to notice strange details. The Addington estate's upstairs windows glowed at odd hours, 2, 3, even 4 in the morning, though no one seemed awake during the day. The curtains, those heavy red drapes, occasionally shifted, as if someone were peering out. Mrs. Helen Wilcox, who lived across the street, told police in October. It wasn't the girls. They were too short. The figure at the window was tall, broad. But when I looked again, the curtains had fallen shut. It was like it wanted me to see. Police dismissed her account, calling it imagination. But Helen wasn't the only one. November 14th, 1951, a woman named Diana Murray checked into the Addington boarding house on a rainy night. She was traveling alone, on her way to visit her sister in another city. Her stay lasted less than 12 hours. She appeared at the diner the next morning, pale and shaking, still wearing her coat though the sun was out. She told the waitress, Marjorie Lane, in a whisper, "Something was behind the curtains in my room. Not a person. Bigger than a person, breathing. I heard it right against the fabric." I didn't look. I couldn't. Marjorie remembered this for years afterward. When Diana tried to leave town that day, she swerved her car into a ditch 2 miles down the road. She survived but refused to ever speak of the Addington house again. December 3rd, 1952. It was a bitter winter evening when officers were called to the Addington estate. A passerby reported seeing what looked like blood on the snow near the front steps. When officers arrived, they found red streaks, but upon closer inspection, it was paint. Buckets of it, splattered across the porch as if someone had deliberately poured it. Jonathan Addington explained that vandals had targeted the house. But police noted something odd in their report. The curtains in the upstairs hallway window were drawn aside just slightly. A young woman stood behind them. She did not move or acknowledge officers. Eyes appeared fixed. After 2 minutes, she withdrew behind the curtain. The report was filed. But nothing came of it. April 9th, 1953. It was spring when the Addington daughters, Emily and Clara, were last seen alive. Witnesses recall them walking through town, dressed in the same outdated clothing, their faces pale against the sunlight. They entered the library at 10:12 a.m., spoke briefly to the librarian, and left 30 minutes later. No one ever saw them again. At least, not alive. May 1953. Neighbors grew uneasy. The curtain stayed drawn and no movement was seen for weeks. Jonathan was spotted a handful of times walking to his car, but Margaret was never seen again. One night, around midnight, a delivery driver swore he saw both daughters standing in the upstairs window, not moving. just staring out through the small gap in the curtains. When the driver reported it, police checked the house. Jonathan claimed the girls were away visiting relatives, but when asked where, he faltered. With their aunt, he said. Which aunt? The officer pressed. Jonathan didn't answer. June 1953. By summer, the estate was shuttered. No guests, no visitors, and no sign of the daughters. Rumors spread, kidnapping, illness, even suicide, but without bodies. Nothing could be proven. And then came the accounts of those who claimed the curtains no longer just moved, but revealed things. Mr. Lewis Hart, who cut across the property late one night, said this: I looked up and the curtain was wide open. A woman was inside, but her face wasn't right. It was stretched, like skin pulled too tight. Her hands clawed at the fabric. I ran and never went back. August 1st, 1953. The final credible account came from Mrs. Wilcox again, the neighbor across the street. That night, she was returning home late when she glanced up at the Addington estate. The curtains in the second-floor hall were fully open. Behind them, both daughters stood side by side, their pale faces pressed against the glass. But there was someone else. A tall figure, draped in shadow, loomed behind them, one hand resting on each girl's shoulder. The daughters didn't move, didn't blink. The curtains fell shut. Mrs. Wilcox dropped her groceries on the sidewalk. She later told police, trembling, that wasn't Jonathan, and it wasn't human. From that night on, the daughters were never seen again. September 1953. By the time autumn rolled in, the Addington house was silent. Curtains stayed drawn, the gates locked. Rumors spread like wildfire. Emily and Clara hadn't been seen since spring, and Jonathan Addington avoided everyone. But what shocks people today isn't just the daughter's disappearance. It's the lack of urgency. Police filed no missing persons report, no search, no inquiry. The official explanation? They're visiting relatives. Yet no records of such relatives exist. And when a town historian dug decades later, she found nothing. No birth certificates, no travel logs, no correspondence. It was as if the girls had been erased. Still, whispers persisted. And the house? The house wasn't quiet. October 4th, 1953. At 8:15 p.m., a 14-year-old named Peter Collier was walking home from the local movie theater. He cut down Oak Ridge Lane, directly past the Addington estate. What he saw haunted him for the rest of his life. The curtains were open, just a sliver. I stopped because I thought I saw Emily. She was standing there in the hall, but she wasn't moving. When I got closer, I realized her mouth was opening and closing, like she was trying to say something, but I couldn't hear. And then someone yanked the curtain shut, hard, like it was ripped from the rod. I ran. Decades later, Peter told a documentary crew, I know what I saw. That was Emily. But she looked drained, like all the color was gone. I'll never forget it. Never. November 1953. During renovations on the property's back fence, 2 contracted workers refused to return after their first day. They claimed to have heard whispering voices from inside the house, though Jonathan insisted no one else was home. One worker, Jack Lyons, described it later in an interview. It was like someone whispering right in my ear. But when I turned around, no one was there. And it wasn't English. It was something else. Something that made my stomach drop. Both men left the job unfinished. December 19th, 1953. Despite the growing rumors, Jonathan Addington invited several prominent townsfolk to a holiday gathering. The mayor, the local pastor, and a few businessmen attended. It was meant to prove the family was fine, but witnesses left disturbed. Marjorie Lane, the diner waitress, recounted, I was there helping with the food. Mrs. Addington barely spoke a word. She looked hollow. And the daughters, well, they weren't there. When I asked about them, Jonathan smiled too wide and said, they're resting. They prefer to stay upstairs. Then I heard footsteps on the landing. Heavy, deliberate. But when I looked up, no one was there. Others heard it too. Some swore the curtains on the second floor shifted during dinner, though the room behind them was supposed to be empty. January 7th, 1954. After the new year, Margaret was gone. When questioned, Jonathan told townsfolk she had gone to visit family back east. But no travel tickets existed, and no one received word from her again. The Addington boarding house stood emptier than ever. And yet, witnesses swore they saw her. One neighbor claimed to see Margaret's silhouette framed in the upstairs curtains one night, standing perfectly still, head tilted, as though listening to something inside the house. But Margaret never appeared in public again. February 11, 1954. Against all odds, Jonathan accepted a single boarder, a traveling accountant named Howard Fraser. Howard checked in, intending to stay 3 nights. He lasted 1. At 3:47 a.m., Howard burst into the all-night diner, disheveled, clutching his suitcase. He refused to return to the Addington house, his words, recorded later in police notes. I woke up and the curtains were open. Someone was standing on the other side, just standing there, looking down at me. I pulled the lamp cord and the light went on, but the figure didn't move. It was a woman, pale, hair hanging over her face. When I shouted, the curtains dropped back into place on their own. I don't care what you say, I'm not going back. Howard left town the next day. He never collected his refund. March 3, 1954. Finally, after months of unease, police returned to the Addington estate for a wellness check. Jonathan greeted them stiffly, but allowed them inside. The report noted the house smelled of mildew and old smoke. Curtains hung heavy in every room, many of them nailed into place. The officers asked to see the daughters. Jonathan claimed they were away at boarding school, but the curtains betrayed him. Officer Glenn Randall later testified to his sergeant. As we stood in the hall, one of the upstairs curtains lifted. Just a sliver. I swear I saw a face looking down, white, hollow, with dark eyes. When I nudged my partner, it was gone. The curtain was perfectly still. Jonathan insisted it was a trick of the light. The officers left, unsettled. No further action was taken. April 20th, 1954. Pastor Edward Blackwood took it upon himself to visit the estate, claiming he felt a spiritual disturbance. He was never the same after that night. In a sermon the following Sunday, he told his congregation, "There are places where God does not walk, places where something else has claimed dominion. Behind the curtains of that house, there is no family, only echoes. Do not look too long. Do not listen." Witnesses said his hands trembled as he preached. May 1954. By spring, the Addington estate was no longer simply eerie, it was hostile. Curtains no longer merely shifted. They opened, wide and deliberate, revealing shapes that vanished when directly observed. A delivery boy reported hearing crying coming from behind them, though the room beyond was empty. A seamstress sent to repair torn drapes refused to finish the job, saying something had pulled the fabric out of her hands. The curtains had become more than decoration. They were a boundary. June 1st, 1954. 3 local teenagers dared each other to break into the Addington house. They made it as far as the front parlor before fleeing in terror. One of them, Thomas Greer, gave his account in 1978. The house was freezing, though it was June. We laughed at first, but then the curtains started moving. Every one of them, like someone was walking behind them, touching them as they passed. Then we heard a voice, a girl's voice. She whispered, "Help me. I swear it." We ran out and never went back. July 17, 1954. On this date, the last confirmed sighting of Clara Addington occurred. Mrs. Wilcox once again glanced across the street and saw the curtain on the second-floor hall parting. Behind it, Clara stood, thin, frail, her eyes wide with terror. She raised her hand against the glass, as though trying to reach out. But before Mrs. Wilcox could react, another hand, large, dark, and clawed, wrapped around Clara's wrist and pulled her violently back into the shadows. The curtain snapped shut. Mrs. Wilcox collapsed on her porch. She later told investigators, "That wasn't Jonathan. That wasn't a man at all." October 23, 1994. The house had grown colder, though the weather outside hadn't changed much. Neighbors who walked by noticed the frost that clung stubbornly to the Addington windows, while the rest of the street remained free of ice. To most, it was nothing more than a quirk of an old house, but to those living inside, it felt like the walls were drawing in, suffocating warmth from the air. For Mark and Evelyn, sleep had become rare. The children, David and Anna, whispered to each other at night about the woman behind the curtains. They described her in fragments: pale face, dark dress, hands pressed against the fabric as though she longed to be let in. Evelyn dismissed it at first, But when Anna began waking with scratch marks along her arms, she couldn't ignore it anymore. "They're not doing it to themselves," Evelyn told Mark, holding Anna's trembling hand one morning. "Look at the pattern." "That's not a child's fingernail." Mark, exhausted and pale, simply nodded. He had begun to feel the weight of eyes on him, even during mundane tasks like shaving in the bathroom mirror or tying his shoes in the hallway. He had started locking the curtains shut at night, but each morning he found them slightly open again, just enough to let in a sliver of moonlight. By this point, the Addington story was starting to spill beyond the walls of their home. On October 25th, 1994, a mailman delivering letters to the neighborhood swore he saw a figure watching from the Addingtons' upstairs window. He described her as an older woman, gray hair, very stern expression. When he mentioned it casually to Mark at the mailbox, Mark went pale. "There's no one upstairs during the day," Mark muttered. The mailman never approached the house again. The same week, Evelyn's friend Marissa stopped by with groceries. She left them on the porch after Evelyn didn't answer the door, but later confessed that she heard children laughing in the upstairs room, laughter that stopped the instant she knocked. Determined not to lose control, Mark decided to explore the attic, which had always been locked since they moved in. The previous owner's papers mentioned nothing about it. With a crowbar in hand, Mark broke the rusted padlock. Inside, dust thick as snow swirled in the beam of his flashlight. Old trunks, moth-eaten curtains, and a rocking chair sat untouched. But against the far wall, partly concealed behind rotting fabric, Mark noticed something strange. A door smaller than the rest, no taller than 4 feet, as if built for a child. The door had no handle, only a keyhole. And unlike the rest of the attic, the wood wasn't decayed. It looked preserved, almost newer than everything else around it. That night, Mark told Evelyn. "It doesn't make sense," he said quietly at the dinner table. "A house this old and a door sealed shut like that. It's not in the blueprints." "I checked." Evelyn shook her head. "Don't open it." "Please, Mark, whatever's behind it, maybe it should stay there." But the decision was already made in his mind. The very next evening, Evelyn was sitting in the living room with Anna while David did his homework. The curtains along the wide bay window suddenly rippled, though no breeze came from the vent. Anna pointed wide-eyed. "She's back," Anna whispered. Evelyn froze. Slowly she turned toward the curtains. For a second, she swore she saw the outline of hands pressing against the fabric from the inside, as though something was trying to come through. The curtains fell still, but Evelyn's heart wouldn't stop racing. She pulled Anna close. Later that night, while Mark was upstairs in the attic, Evelyn whispered into the phone to Marissa. "We're leaving," she said. "Tomorrow. We're packing up. I can't let my kids go through this anymore." But they never left the next day. On October 27th, 1994, Mark finally pried open the small door in the attic. He refused to let Evelyn come up with him, insisting it was better if only he saw. The door creaked open with a sound like a scream caught in wood. Behind it was a narrow passageway no wider than a closet. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of mold and something sharper, like iron. At the end of the passage, Mark found a small room. Inside were child-sized chairs arranged in a neat circle. On each seat, a doll sat upright, their glass eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam. Each doll wore handmade clothing, some with lace collars, others with faded ribbons. But the disturbing part wasn't the dolls. It was the fabric of their dresses. The patterns were familiar, too familiar. Mark's heart dropped when he realized why. The clothing matched pieces of fabric he had seen in Old Family. Photographs that hung in the hallway, the same. Dresses worn by children of the Addington family and portraits dating back to the early 1900s pinned on the wall above the circle of dolls was a tattered velvet curtain. Its edges were singed, as though it had once been burned. Mark staggered backward, slamming into the doorway. His flashlight flickered. For the briefest moment, he swore the dolls had turned their heads toward him. He shut the door and nailed it closed, his hands shaking. That night, Mark told Evelyn what he saw. "It was a nursery," he said, voice breaking. "Or a shrine. I don't know. But it's not normal. Someone built that space deliberately. Someone wanted it hidden." Evelyn pressed her hands to her face. "Why would anyone build a room like that?" Mark had no answer, but deep inside, Evelyn already knew. She had seen enough signs, enough whispers from the children. enough shadows flickering across the curtains. The Addington family history was never just history. It was repeating itself over the next few days. Small events spiraled into larger disturbances. David complained of someone whispering his name while he tried to sleep. Anna refused to enter the living room, saying the woman behind the curtains smiled too wide. The neighbors reported hearing music, an old piano tune, coming from the Addington house at midnight. But Mark and Evelyn didn't even own a piano. On October 29, 1994, Evelyn found a note tucked beneath the curtains in the living room. The paper was yellowed, edges curled, written in elegant script. Don't let them see behind the fabric. That's where the truth bleeds through. No one in the house admitted to writing it. By Halloween Eve, October 30th, 1994, everything came to a head. Evelyn woke in the middle of the night to find the bed empty beside her. Mark was gone. She searched the house in a panic before hearing faint thuds above her, footsteps in the attic. When she climbed the stairs, the air turned icy. The attic door stood open. Inside, she found Mark kneeling before the small hidden door he had sealed shut days before. Except now it wasn't sealed. It stood wide open, darkness yawning inside. Mark's face was blank, his eyes unfocused, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. She says the children never left, he whispered when Evelyn touched his shoulder. She says they're still here waiting. Evelyn backed away, trembling. From the passage beyond the door came a sound she would never forget for the rest of her life. The soft creak of dolls shifting in their chairs, followed by faint, childlike laughter. The curtains downstairs flared open at that exact moment. Though no one was there to touch them, Evelyn screamed, and the house answered back. Neighbors later reported seeing lights flickering violently inside the Addington house that night. Though no one dared approach, some swore they saw silhouettes pressed against the curtains from the street, dozens of them, all at once. But when dawn came, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The Addington family would never be the same after that night, and by the time Halloween arrived, the truth of the house's past would no longer be something that could be ignored. October 31st, 1994. Halloween dawned gray and silent over the Addington house. Leaves clung to the sidewalks, damp from overnight rain, and plastic decorations fluttered in neighbors' yards. Children dressed as witches and skeletons would soon take over the streets, but inside the Addington home, no one spoke of costumes or candy. The night before had left scars. Evelyn barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dolls turning their heads and heard the faint laughter that didn't belong to living children. And Mark, though he insisted he remembered nothing, still had the look of someone who had brushed against something he could never explain. "We need to go," Evelyn whispered over breakfast. "Tonight." Before dark. Mark didn't answer at first. He stared into his coffee, his hand trembling so hard the mug rattled against the saucer. Finally he said, "If we leave now, she'll follow. You saw what happened. This isn't about the house anymore. It's about us." The children sat in silence, pale and weary. Anna clutched her stuffed rabbit so tightly its ears had nearly torn off. David refused to look at the windows, his gaze locked on the floor. The Addingtons weren't just haunted by history. They were trapped in it. By mid-afternoon, the house seemed restless. The curtains in the living room shivered constantly, as though a storm raged outside. Yet the trees beyond the glass stood perfectly still. The phone rang once every hour, but when Evelyn picked up, there was only silence, broken by faint breathing. At 4:12 p.m., a note slid out from beneath the living room curtain, landing on the rug. Evelyn read it aloud, her voice cracking. "Do not stay when the night is loud. Curtains cannot hold forever." Mark grabbed the note and shoved it into his pocket, his jaw tight. "Who is writing these?" Evelyn demanded. "Not who," Mark said. "What?" By 6 p.m., trick-or-treaters had begun to flood the neighborhood. Laughter and footsteps echoed outside, children's voices bright against the growing dark. But inside the Addington house, not a single light was on. Mark had shut off every lamp, every bulb. "Light draws them," he muttered, boarding up the curtains with nails and wood planks. But it didn't help. At 7:23 p.m., David screamed from upstairs. Evelyn and Mark rushed into his room and found the boy trembling on the floor. His closet door, which had always stuck shut, now gaped open. Inside, the same velvet curtain from the hidden attic room hung across the back wall, though they had never placed it there. Anna began crying, clutching her brother. Evelyn dragged them both out, slamming the closet door. But the curtain inside swayed gently, as if a breeze moved through it. By 9 p.m., the Addington house became something unrecognizable. The walls groaned and cracked, plaster falling in chunks. Curtains fluttered violently in every room, some tearing loose from their rods as though pulled by unseen hands. The sound of a piano drifted down from the attic, slow, deliberate notes of an old lullaby. Mark grabbed a hammer and shouted, "We're leaving now." He ushered the children toward the front door, but when he yanked it open, the world outside wasn't the neighborhood they knew. The street was gone. In its place stretched a black field of curtains, endless rows of fabric billowing in a windless void. Evelyn slammed the door shut before the children could see. Her hands shook so violently she could barely grip the knob. "We're not leaving," she whispered. "There's nowhere to go." At 10:15 p.m., the entity finally showed itself. The family huddled in the living room, surrounded by nailed boards and torn curtains. Then, one by one, the boards ripped free from the windows, tossed across the room like toys. The curtains rose as if lifted by invisible hands, and there she stood, the woman behind the curtains. She was taller than Evelyn expected, her figure draped in black lace that seemed to flow into the fabric itself. Her face was pale, nearly colorless, eyes hollow yet burning with a strange light. When she spoke, the sound wasn't a voice. It was the rustle of fabric, the scraping of wood, the groan of the house itself. "You opened the room," she hissed. "Now the children remember," Anna screamed, burying her face in Evelyn's chest. David clung to Mark, frozen with terror. Mark shouted, "What do you want from us?" The woman tilted her head, her skeletal hand brushing the curtain beside her, to finish what was begun. At that moment, the dolls from the attic spilled into the living room, dozens of them tumbling down the stairs, their glass eyes shining in the dark. They gathered at the woman's feet, their tiny heads turning in unison toward the Addington family. Mark grabbed Evelyn's arm. "The basement, now." They fled down the creaking steps, slamming the heavy door behind them. The basement smelled of damp stone and rust, but it felt safer than the chaos upstairs, or so they thought. As they caught their breath, David pointed to the far wall. "Mom," he whispered, "look." A curtain hung there too, one that hadn't been there before. It covered nearly the entire wall, its edges nailed into the foundation as if it had always belonged. The fabric stirred, though the air was still. From behind it came faint whispers, children's voices counting in a sing-song rhythm. Evelyn clutched Anna tighter. "We can't stay here." Mark raised the hammer, his face pale but resolute. "Then we tear it down." He swung hard, the nails groaning as the curtain loosened. But instead of a wall behind it, they saw another room, glowing faintly with candlelight. A nursery. Rocking chairs creaked back and forth on their own. Cradles shifted, as though unseen infants lay within. The whispers grew louder. Evelyn screamed, pulling the children back, but Mark stood frozen, staring into the room as though entranced. "Mark!" Evelyn cried, shaking him. "Don't go in!" But it was too late. At 11:55 p.m., Evelyn made a desperate decision. She grabbed the children and bolted up the basement stairs, dragging them outside through the back door. This time, the neighborhood was there again. The porch light glowing, children still running down the street. The air was cold and clear. For a brief moment, Evelyn thought they had escaped. She fell to her knees in the yard, sobbing as Anna and David clung to her. Behind them, the Addington house stood quiet, its curtains still. Neighbors looked on, confused but concerned. One even called out, "Are you all right?" Evelyn almost answered, almost believed the nightmare was over, but then she realized Mark wasn't with them. She turned back toward the house and saw him through the window, standing perfectly still in the living room. His face pressed against the curtain, his eyes wide and unblinking, and behind him, looming just beyond the fabric, the woman's pale hands closed around his shoulders. The curtains fell shut. Evelyn's scream echoed across the street as midnight struck. November 1st, 1994. 12:07 a.m. The neighborhood was alive, with laughter and distant fireworks, children still trailing from house to house with plastic pumpkins filled with candy. No one noticed Evelyn Addington kneeling in her front yard, her hands clawing at the damp grass as her scream tore through the night. Through the living room window, she had seen her husband. Mark stood perfectly still, his face pressed against the curtain, his eyes blank. And then, just as quickly, the fabric had fallen, shutting him away as if the house had swallowed him whole. Now, all that remained was silence. Evelyn clutched Anna and David, both trembling violently in her arms. Neighbors called out to her, their voices edged with concern, but none dared come closer to the Addington property. They knew its reputation. They had heard the stories, and Evelyn knew now, with a clarity that chilled her blood, that those stories were not exaggerated. They were warnings. By 12:30 a.m., Evelyn had convinced herself she had no choice. She had to go back inside. She sat the children down on the porch steps, their faces pale in the moonlight. "Stay here, no matter what happens. Do you hear me?" Anna clung to her sleeve. "Mom, don't go." David's eyes filled with tears. "Dad's already gone." Evelyn pulled them both close. "I have to try. I won't let him be taken." She pried Anna's small hands from her sleeve and turned back toward the house. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. It carried the faint smell of candle wax and dust. And everywhere, the curtains moved. As Evelyn stepped inside, the house seemed to shift. Hallways elongated, doors that once led to familiar rooms now opened into strange, unfamiliar spaces. She passed the kitchen, but instead of the scent of stale bread and unwashed dishes, she smelled something sharp, iron, copper. The smell of blood. From behind one curtain in the dining room, she heard faint whispers. Children's voices, overlapping, repeating the same phrase. "He shouldn't have looked. He shouldn't have looked." Evelyn ripped the curtain aside, but the window behind it was bricked over, as though it had never been meant to let in light. The whispers stopped instantly. Her heart thundered in her chest. But she pressed forward. She found Mark in the parlor. He stood motionless in front of the great velvet curtain, the same one they had discovered in the attic, the one that seemed to stretch through every room now. His hands were limp at his sides, his face pale. His eyes fixed on something Evelyn could not see. "Mark," she whispered, reaching for him. The curtain rippled, and the woman stepped through. Her figure was clearer now, no longer just a shape behind the fabric. She was draped in a gown of lace and black silk, her eyes deep hollows ringed with shadow. Her lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile. "You shouldn't have come back," the woman hissed. Evelyn shielded her eyes, forcing herself not to look into those hollows. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" The woman tilted her head. "Do you not know? The Addington name is mine. The children were mine. This house remembers what it was promised." Evelyn's breath caught. "Promised?" The woman lifted her hand, brushing the curtain as though it were flesh. "Blood for silence. Children for peace. But your husband opened the room and the silence ended. Now the house is awake." Mark stirred at last, his voice hollow. "Evelyn, I can hear them." The woman moved closer, her form bending and shifting with the curtains. She whispered, her words weaving into the creak of the house itself. "In 1852, the Addingtons sealed me here. They took my children, stolen from my arms, buried beneath these walls, so they could build their future on silence. They drew the curtains to hide me away. But curtains rot, promises break." Evelyn's knees weakened. She remembered the old papers in the attic, the fragments of nursery rhymes scribbled in faded ink, the names that didn't match any census records. The Addington wealth hadn't been luck. It had been bought, and the price was children, her children. Mark groaned, clutching his head. "She's inside me," he whispered. "I can hear them calling. They need me to stay." Evelyn grabbed his arms, shaking him. "You don't belong to her. Fight it, Mark!" But when he looked at her, his eyes were no longer his own. They were dark, hollow, mirroring the woman's gaze. "Evelyn," he said softly, "come behind the curtains. It's the only way to be safe." The woman smiled faintly. Evelyn stumbled back, her hand covering her mouth. "No, you're not him. Not anymore." Upstairs, Anna screamed. The sound pierced through the house like a blade. Evelyn bolted up the stairs, leaving Mark behind. She found her children in the hallway, both pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. From inside the wall itself came scratching. Tiny fingers, dozens of them, clawing at the plaster from within. Cracks split down the paint, little indentations appearing like handprints. Anna sobbed, "They're trying to come out." Evelyn grabbed both children, pulling them away just as a piece of plaster broke free, tumbling to the floor. From the hole emerged a tiny hand, pale, skeletal, writhing in the air as though reaching for something it had lost long ago. David screamed, and Evelyn dragged them both into the nearest room, slamming the door shut. As she pressed her back against the door, the woman's voice seeped through the walls. "Give them to me. Give the children back and I will let you go. That is the Addington way. That is the promise." Evelyn's blood turned cold. Anna shook her head violently. "Mom, don't let her take us." David clutched his mother's arm, whispering, "We can't stay here." "She'll never stop." Evelyn's mind spun. If she refused, they would all die. If she agreed, her children would be gone forever, lost behind the curtains with the others. It wasn't a choice. It was a curse. At 2:45 a.m., Evelyn made her decision. She carried Anna and David downstairs, their small bodies shaking with fear. The woman waited in the living room, her black gown trailing into the curtains, Mark standing beside her like a hollow puppet. The woman extended her hand. "Choose. Honor the promise." "Blood for silence." Evelyn shook her head. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "No, this ends tonight. You'll never have them." The woman's smile faded. The curtains behind her convulsed violently, as if a storm raged within them. Dolls crashed from shelves, glass shattering across the floor. The house roared with fury. Evelyn pulled her children behind her, lifting the fireplace poker like a weapon. "You took enough, children. You'll never take mine." The woman's hollow eyes narrowed. "Then you will all stay." Evelyn lunged forward, driving the poker into the curtain itself. For a split second, the fabric resisted like flesh. Then it tore. A shriek erupted, not just from the woman, but from the house itself. The walls shook violently, pictures crashing, plaster raining down. The curtain split open, revealing not the street outside, but a black void filled with hundreds of pale hands reaching outward. Mark staggered, clutching his head, his voice torn between his own and the woman's. "Evelyn, help me." She grabbed him, pulling with all her strength, but the void pulled harder, sucking at his body, dragging him into the dark. "Take me instead," Evelyn screamed. "Leave the children, take me." But the woman only smiled, her form dissolving into the storm of curtains. Mark's hand slipped from Evelyn's grip. His body vanished into the void, and then silence. The curtains hung limp. The void was gone. Evelyn collapsed to the floor, her children sobbing into her arms. The house was quiet now, still and broken. But as Evelyn pulled her children toward the door, she noticed something. Every curtain in the house was torn. Every window was bare, except one. The great velvet curtain in the parlor still hung intact, swaying gently though there was no wind, and from behind it came the faint sound of Mark's voice whispering, "Evelyn, don't leave me here." November 2nd, 1994, 3:15 a.m. The Addington house was silent when Evelyn finally opened the front door and led her children outside. The night air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, but it was real. Grass wet with dew crunched beneath her shoes. The distant laughter of the last trick-or-treaters had faded. She half expected the street to be gone again, replaced by that endless black field of curtains. But the neighborhood was there. Porch lights glowed. Cars lined the street. A dog barked from a yard down the block. Normal life had returned, except Mark wasn't with them. Evelyn clutched Anna and David close as she guided them away from the house. She didn't look back. Not once. By 5:45 a.m., police cruisers lined the street. Officers stood in the yard, their radios crackling, their flashlights sweeping across the windows. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering. Evelyn sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket. She had told the truth, or as much of it as she could. My husband disappeared inside the house. The officers exchanged looks but said little. One of them, Sergeant Halpern, crouched beside her. "Ma'am, I need you to be clear. Did your husband leave the property?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, he was taken by the curtains." The sergeant's pen stopped over his notepad. His face tightened. "Curtains." Evelyn realized how it sounded. She looked at Anna and David, both curled against her side, pale and silent. Then she whispered, "You won't understand. But he's gone." The official report would later state Mark Addington, missing person. Last seen inside family residence. Presumed voluntary disappearance. But Evelyn knew better. The weeks that followed blurred together. Evelyn moved Anna and David into her sister's home across town. She never stepped foot inside the Addington house again. Friends visited, bringing casseroles, toys for the children, soft words of pity. But Evelyn saw the questions in their eyes. Was she hiding something? Did she hurt him? Only the children knew the truth. Anna clung to her mother's side, refusing to sleep without the hallway light on. David avoided curtains entirely, begging to keep blinds bare, windows uncovered. Once Evelyn caught him whispering into the wall at night. "Don't listen to her. She can't have us." When she asked who he meant, David only said, "The lady." By December 1994, the Addington house stood abandoned. Boards covered the windows. The city marked it for repossession, but strange things continued to happen. Neighbors claimed they still saw movement behind the curtains at night, even though the electricity had been cut. Some swore they saw a figure standing in the upstairs window, staring down at the street, and more than once. Children playing nearby said they heard someone whispering their names when they passed too close. None of them went near the house after dark. 2003. Nearly a decade later, in a 2003 local documentary on haunted properties, Evelyn agreed to speak publicly for the first time. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face lined with years of sleepless nights. The interviewer asked, "Do you believe Mark is still in the house?" Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, I hear him in my dreams. He's behind the curtains. He calls for me." The interviewer leaned forward. "Then why not go back?" Her eyes welled with tears. "Because if I do, I won't come out again. And my children need me here." The camera lingered on her face, pale and haunted. Anna and David by 2010. Anna was in college, studying psychology. She admitted in a campus paper interview that she chose the field to understand what isn't supposed to be real. She said she still heard lullabies in her dreams. David, quieter, avoided interviews. But in a private conversation with a researcher, he revealed something chilling. "When I was little, she used to whisper through the curtains at night. She promised she'd let Dad go if I came back to her. I almost did once." When asked if he believed his father was dead, David shook his head. "No, he's not dead. He's waiting." October 31st, 2013, 20 years later. On the 20th anniversary of Mark's disappearance, Evelyn returned to the Addington house alone. The boards over the windows had long since rotted. Vandals had spray-painted the siding, but the house still stood, its shape looming against the autumn sky. Neighbors later reported seeing her walk up the front steps with a candle in hand. She entered the house, the door shut. She never came out. Police searched days later. They found the candle on the living room floor. They found Evelyn's coat, her shoes neatly placed by the door, but Evelyn Addington herself was gone. And the curtains in the parlor, though the windows were broken and glassless, still hung intact, swaying gently in the draft. This story still circulates in the town today. The house remains abandoned, though no one dares tear it down. Children dare each other to peek through its windows on Halloween night. But none last long, because they say if you stand in front of the parlor curtains long enough, you'll hear voices whispering your name. Some swear they've seen faces, Mark, Evelyn, even children, pressed against the fabric, mouthing words you can't quite hear. And no one can explain why the curtains never rot, never fray, never fall, even after decades. They move on their own as though something or someone still hides behind them. This isn't folklore. Police reports exist. Witness interviews were documented, and families who lived nearby still refused to speak of what they saw. The haunting history of the Addingtons didn't end when the house was abandoned. It lingers, waiting for someone to draw the curtains back. The end.